the issues and recommendations that came out of the fiscal governance tribunals we had across the country last year. And we've been able to compile them, listing some of the core challenges that arose, that were identified at the tribunal, and the recommendations that came out of them. The tribunals were held across the country to give Nigerians of all classes the opportunity to review the experiences with the fiscal system and to provide solutions to the myriad of challenges. They were designed against the background that different stakeholders have different experiences with the fiscal system, and their experiences were shaped by the power relations and what the stakeholders demanded from the system. It provided opportunities for testimonies from stakeholders, including contractors and service providers, communities where projects were located, community-based organizations, women's groups, youth associations, various shades of civil society groups, the academia, fiscal governance experts and professional groups, organized labor, private sector, and some government agencies. The testimonies dwelt on who or which government agencies were involved in the experience and the subject matter of the testimony. It sought to answer questions, and it did answer questions including what was the issue at stake, where is the project located, where did the encounter with fiscal governance operatives take place. It also sought to unravel why the particular experience happened and how to replicate pleasant experiences and best practices, while putting an end to violations of the law and the impunity for fiscal malfeasance. Fiscal governance experts presided over the tribunals, and the proceedings were recorded by rapporteurs. At the end of the day, we have distilled the challenges as well as the recommendations for improvements of the system. All this we have done in the context of the extant laws, including the 1999 Constitution, the Fiscal Responsibility and Public Procurement Act, and the Financial Regulations, Treasury Circulars, Code of Conduct for Public Officers, and various standards on international good practices in fiscal management. The overall purpose was to give citizens a voice in public finance and fiscal management, and to provide evidence for the executive and legislature to reform fiscal management. The report which we are presenting today, which is the voices and views, is divided into 5 parts covering the following. Part 1 deals with plans and policies. Part 2 is on medium-term expenditure frameworks and budget initiation. Part 3 is on budget implementation. Part 4 deals with what we consider to be institutional issues, budget reporting and audits, while Part 5 is on borrowing and debt management. Fiscal governance experts gave testimonies about the plan budget policy continuing and the absence of convergence between the three, plan, policy, and the budget. Contractors and service providers testified about the problems associated with capital budget implementation and the public procurement system. Communities and their groups gave the experience about project location, contract implementation, environmental and community issues. The tribunals had the privilege of hearing from distinguished private sector operatives, economists, lawyers, and other professionals who also recounted the experience of their interactions with the system. Challenges were identified and followed by recommendations, and these were supplemented by desk research. The key recommendations dwelt on administrative issues that were needed to improve the implementation of existing laws, enforcement of laws, new proposals for laws to plug existing gaps and leakages, specific actions to be taken by the executive, legislature, and the whole gamut of civil society. The outcome of the tribunals also contributed to our efforts in designing the Fiscal Responsibility Index to gauge the performance of various government agencies in the implementation of good and fit practices. In presenting this report, Center for Social Justice is of the firm belief that these recommendations, if implemented, will contribute to improvements in the fiscal system in Nigeria. Now let's look at selected issues and the recommendations. It's not the whole of the issues that were dwelt in the report of the tribunal. Now the first issue that we looked at is that of policy reversals constant change of plans and policy direction by governments, and lack of follow-through to policies. You will recall that the Obasanjo administration started with the National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy, which he called NEEPS. Thereafter, its and its successor, late President Yar'Adua, immediately abandoned NEEPS and started the 7-point agenda. And as soon as he left this world, his vice president who took over and became the president abandoned the 7-point agenda and started transformation agenda. And all these policies were within just one party, not a change of party. And so you could see that what made meaning to one did not make meaning to the other. And so there was a lot of discontinuity in policy and plans, and this affected budget implementation and the fiscal system. And our recommendation is to use the legal framework to institutionalize generally agreed policy positions so as to make them difficult to change, unless there are clear and urgent circumstances that make continuity unreasonable. And the National Planning Commission and the legislature should identify the bills to be enacted into law for the realization of the vision, which I mean Vision 2020, and other strategic plans, and ensure the enactment. The bill should command priority attention in the legislature. In the Vision 2020, there was supposed to be a first national implementation plan, 2010 to 2013, followed by a second national implementation plan, 2014 to 2017, and followed by the terminal third implementation plan, 2018 to 2020. But after the first national implementation plan, 2010 to 2013, there was an attempt by the former Minister of National Planning, Shamsuddin Usman, to produce the second national implementation plan, but that coincided with the politics of the PDP. He was removed, and there it ended. So today, being 2015, there's no second national implementation plan. I heard yesterday that when the National Planning Commission went to meet the president, that they are now planning a new national implementation plan 2016 to 2019 or thereabout. So this shows you a lot of policy discontinuity. And then the second issue is poor policy buy-in by critical stakeholders. And we are recommending that every stakeholder should be on board. You are making a policy. Even the sectoral experts and operatives may not be very much aware of the policy. So there's no buy-in in the first place. You even see legislators who may not be aware of high-level national policies in critical sectors where they're exercising oversight. So how can they be the ones to push their oversight mechanism for the realization of goals and policies of a plan or a policy that they know next to nothing about? Now there's a disconnect between approved plans, policies, and budgets. The plan is supposed to inform policy, and the policy is supposed to inform the budget. So it's a continuum. It's like plan, budget, policy in a circle. Now when you just make your budget without looking at what the policy and the plan states, you are simply spending in a vacuum. And I could very well pick out some projects you can ask yourself. The federal government goes to build under the name of constituency projects in one community, remote community in the southeast or south-south. You are building in your federal budget, you are building a town hall. How does that contribute to high-level national policies and goals as you find in Vision 2020, or in the national health policy, or in the national education policy, or access to water or anything? So it's just like you have a plan, you have a beautiful policy, and the instrument to let it go, to make it work, which is the budget, you don't use it. This one stays here, this one stays here, there's no meeting point, there's no convergence, so things don't work out. Another major issue is poor monitoring and evaluation, because monitoring and evaluation is not mainstream in most of our planning frameworks. And we are saying that this should henceforth, going forth, be mainstream. Vision 2020 actually had a good idea of how to monitor, evaluate, and let it feed into the policy framework. But of course, it's more or less abandoned. So when you monitor and you evaluate, you take the results and the lessons learned to the next cycle of project implementation. So it's continuous improvement, continuous feeding into the system to improve it. And that brings us to the idea of review and course correction. Plans and policies should be living documents. They should be products of iteration. Iteration is a process of you moving back and forth, learning from experience of implementation, and so as a living document, you are perpetually fine-tuning those plans and policies and their implementation through the budget. So that's why we recommended that plans and policies don't have to be made and left stagnant, but that they should become living documents, iterative documents, with provisions for timely review and course correction. Because the idea of course correction is that you want to be one of the 20 biggest economies by the year 2020. And you set in that direction and you begin to see that rather than moving left, where is where you wanted to be, you are on your way to the right. So you do course correction to share the steep of state economy back to the left direction where you said at first that you are moving. Now, there is another major challenge which we saw, which is also partly responsible for this failure of plan, policy, and the budget to be together, which is the abandonment of the MTF goal hub. The medium-term expenditure framework is, I consider it also as a big goal hub. It should start with letting MDAs do what they call medium-term sector strategies. And when they are doing it, the permanent secretary, the directors have to be there. The committees in the National Assembly exercising oversight over that particular agency should be there. The organized private sector that is working in that area should be there. The academia, organized labor, civil society, so that you see your envelope and say this is what we are going to do. Find out high-level national plans and policies, use it to do that sectoral medium-term sector strategies, which builds now into the MTF. But we have a situation where we've abandoned preparing medium-term sector strategies. So you ask yourself, what actually fits into the MTF? We were told at the last time by the former director of the budget office that is the transformation agenda. And when you look at the transformation agenda and look at Vision 2020, look at the whole idea of fiscal responsibility and planning, you see a very huge disconnect. So we are saying that we must go back to the old way of doing things, which is to use the MTSS to feed into the MTF. And then to do it beautifully well, we need to adopt a model. We can no longer continue to have a Minister of Finance that thinks they know it all, when actually nobody knows it all. If you think you know it all, you are going to make a big mistake, which is what has been happening in the last 6 years. We recommend a process where the National Planning Commission, Central Bank of Nigeria, Debt Management Office, Fiscal Responsibility Commission, National Bureau of Statistics, and the Minister of Finance and Budget Office should come together to prepare the MTF. Of course, Minister of Finance and Budget Office should take the lead as the lead agency. Now, consult all stakeholders, including civil society, organized labor, and private sector, carry them along. Why do you need the National Planning Commission? They anchored the preparation of plans like Vision 2020. Why do you need Central Bank? Today, we are talking about management of the value of the Naira. We are talking about foreign reserves. We are talking about the exchange rate and interest rates. So the CBN needs to come in because the MTF talks about a macroeconomic framework which brings together what? Monetary policy and fiscal policy together. So we need all these agencies on board. Of course, the macroeconomic framework should now begin to see to the fact that you give us a little brief history of what has happened, particularly to the projections you made earlier, and how you implemented them before you begin to project into what will happen in the next 1.5 to 3 years. And a very important point, which is managing the perpetual liquidity challenge. This issue has been talked about so much, but our administrators and leaders are not thinking the way Vision 2020 documented what we should do. That document stated clearly how to tackle the challenges related to inflation, excess liquidity, and bringing down interest rates. Now, it says that dealing with excess liquidity challenge requires innovative approaches in view of the sources of the problem. One potentially enduring solution, which will avoid the creation of new money and boost the value of the Naira in the foreign exchange market, relates to the allocation of foreign exchange earned from oil directly to the trade tiers of government rather than monetizing it. But this may lead to capital flight. Therefore, the central bank will need to develop capacity for liquidity forecasting and programming. That's what Vision 2020 said. Let me tell you practically what it means. When we get the crude oil resources that have been sold and transferred back to us, it comes in what? Dollars. don't substitute it for the central bank and the need to go and print money. Like to say the share of federal government is $100 million, you times it by the current exchange rate and go and print another naira. You are creating new money. And that money is not actually backed up by any value. Why don't you put it, create federal government with $100 million in a bank or through the CBN, when they now want to access their money because we are working in Nigeria, just like me, through my domiciliary account, you go, the banks will change it for you. Instead of creating new money, because what the CBN does is that each time they will get the proceeds of the sale of crude oil, you create new money. It fuels excess liquidity, it fuels inflation, it talks about the value of the naira. But Vision 2020 made mention of this and stated it, and nobody seems to be listening. Of course, we've talked about review, and we've talked about fiscal strategy. We need to have it converge with monetary policy. That's why we talked about the CBN coming in initially. Convergence between fiscal strategy and policy interventions. If you are telling us this is the new fiscal policy, there must be clear new interventions that are linked to it. Revenue and expenditure framework. We've said that there should be a holistic document. For instance, if you are banning the importation of Tokumbo cars that have, that are more than 10 years old, the Customs and Excise should be able to give you the figures of how much revenue that used to come in through import duties from all those cars in the last 2 or 3 years. And on that basis, you make your projection. You will not be making a projection for the increase in customs and excise duties when you are cutting down what from where the customs duties should come in. So that's the kind of staccato revenue forecasting we have in Nigeria, which we say should stop. Because as a holistic document, your fiscal framework, your macroeconomic framework should reflect in your revenue and expenditure framework for it to be a holistic package that makes meaning. Now, we also looked at abandonment of projects, time and cost overruns, and procurement challenges. We also fell back to the vision, which had identified a number of new policies and laws that should be enacted, but which we have refused, failed, and neglected to enact. One of it is the capital budget rollover bill. Another is the continuity and implementation bill, project continuity and implementation bill, which makes development planning compulsory at all tiers of government. And now says you must have a list of all projects at the state level, at the federal level, both abandoned and ongoing, so that when you want to do the budget, you have a picture that you already started 10 roads. You have not finished constructing them. The money available can only do two roads. Instead of you focusing on 2, among the 10 you started already, you go and start another 3 roads. You spread the resources too thin across the board. Complete 1 road, you can't complete. Withdraw the money, you can't withdraw. So you spend the money, no road is completed, for instance. I usually like to give the example of the Ministry of Works. Every year, the Ministry of Works has over 100 roads in the budget. But all the money available cannot pay for more than 3 or 4 roads. So why can't we sit down, even if it's at the level of the political leadership or the geopolitical zone, say, South, tell us the roads you think are most important. We put the money and complete it. Northwest, tell us. Instead of having 100 roads and nobody will complete them. Of course, we talked about also full implementation of the Public Procurement Act and the constitution of the National Council on Public Procurement by the President. I'm happy that the current President has assured Nigerians he will do so. By the time he finishes studying or listening to the handover notes of all the ministries, departments, and agencies, I think that should be the next stage. Then we talked about high cost of government contracts. And we suggested, or the recommendation that came out from the tribunals, is to establish a price database, benchmark prices, and implement sanctions against offenders, people who inflate contracts. You can even see all manners of things from this work. These things are available and everybody knows them, but nobody seems to be interested in doing something about it. And that creates a whole lot of challenges. We get instances of projects that were very, very costly compared to other places, like the Abuja airport project. runway project that was eventually stopped. They told us that it was offered at 64 billion, later reduced to 49 billion. Similar runways in Djibouti cost 6.99 billion. In India, Helsinki, it cost 2.14 billion. And the Gombe airport, a similar airport, cost only 7.5 billion. Meanwhile, you are talking about 40-something billion for similar activities. So nobody seems to be brought to order, to be brought to book for some of these issues, and that's why it continues. Ghost workers and fiscal responsibility, we are of the view, and what came out from there is that there should be a full rollout of the integrated personnel and payroll information system. Prosecute the officials who put the names of ghost workers on the payroll to serve as deterrent to others in future, and recover all monies due to the treasury. The instance we gave when we went to court for these ghost workers was that when we got the list, for instance, in the Ministry of Finance, pre-verification, they had about 1,000 workers. Post-verification, they now have about 250 workers, which means the difference was as much as 3/4. If it is like 10 or 20 workers, I can agree that there was no fraud, it was like a few manipulation. But for the reporters of the workforce to be ghosts, means that the permanent secretary or whoever is leading that place must be involved. The director of personnel management must be involved. Even the minister may likely be involved, because there's no way you can chop that kind of huge money as a junior officer when your bosses are not aware. So we are saying, who was in charge as PS that time? Who was in charge as director of finance or director of accounts or the personnel manager? Bring him to book. Let him explain how out of 1,000 workers he claimed he had, when verification was done, only 250 were real. 750 were ghosts. Or else, we give everybody the opportunity to commit all kinds of crimes and get away with it. The oil price-based fiscal rule, which has come under a lot of attack recently, where it's been stated ad nauseum that the excess crude account is an illegal account, citing section 162 and citing section 80 or thereabout of the Constitution. But it is beyond sheer legalism. No country in the world operates on the fact that you get money, you spend it, you don't have any reserves. If you recall, in 2009, it was a $20 billion left in the excess crude account by President Obasanjo that allowed Nigeria not to suffer, to tidy over. And today, why we are suffering is because there was no savings. Each time money came, the government shouted, share it, share it. They went to the Supreme Court to declare the excess crude account illegal. They told us that the rents were already falling. Now today, there is nothing for them to fall back on. That's why everybody is talking about bailout packages. But we think that we should continue with the excess crude account. Don't pour away the water with the baby, because they are saying that the federal government is mismanaging it. So the solution should not be to scrap it, is to properly manage it in a transparent manner. And this is where the issue of appointing an accountant general for the federation came up, which was in the last constitutional review exercise. Although that recommendation, the whole constitutional review recommendations were thrown out because of the politicking between the president and the National Assembly. But appointing an accountant general of the federation, as distinct as from the accountant general of the federal government, we have allowed a neutral third party who was going to report to all three tiers of government to now manage the excess crude account or some similar jointly owned accounts, so that it can be more managed transparently. Reduce inflows into the federation account and the petroleum industry bill. We are firmly of the view that the petroleum industry bill should be reviewed by the present administration and sent back to the legislature, taking account of the legitimate interest of all stakeholders, and it shouldn't take forever to pass. If there are aspects of it that needs to be reviewed, let them review it. If there are also, if it's too bulky because it's even bigger than the Constitution, they can cut it down into parts, about 4 or 5 different parts, and take them one by one and pass them, instead of having a bulky document that is even confusing to those who authored it. Management of the federation account. We have noticed the challenges which have been raised in the recent past about the accounting system that allows groups like NMPC to deduct money before remitting to the Federation account, which has become an opportunity for massive and excessive fraud. We've also noticed some other agencies that more or less return what they call operating surplus to the Treasury. They spend as much as they can and return little or nothing to the Treasury. We think it's imperative that all funds due to the Federation account should be paid into that account, and all revenues accruing from oil and gas activities and other sources of revenues should also be paid directly into the Federation account. And of course, most of them should now come back to the legislature for appropriation so that they can tell us how much they want to spend. The National Assembly looks at their budget, approves it. If they have to borrow money from the banks, from the international bond market, they can borrow, and thereafter they balance their books just like every other credible organization will do. Now, the tribunal looked at the issue of subsidy and came forward with the conclusion that the subsidy should be removed. But if it must be retained, it should be converted into a subsidy on production rather than consumption. What do we mean? We don't want a system where we have to continue putting people in jobs in American, Asian, and European refineries. Let's have a subsidy for people to set up refineries at home. They will pay tax to the government, companies' income tax. They will employ Nigerians. And, you know, at the end of the day, somebody will make profit as a Nigerian, put the money into his pocket, the money will stay in Nigeria. Rather than the current situation where we are putting a massive pressure on the foreign exchange, on foreign reserves, simply because of importing fuel, it becomes a source of fraud perpetually for all manners of people. So that's the kind of thing we say, instead of it being a subsidy on consumption, let it become a subsidy on production if we must have a subsidy. But ideally, it should go. Audit of public accounts. The tribunal came up strongly that the audit bill, which we had, has been passed by the National Assembly but not yet signed, that the President should expeditiously look at it and sign it, because recently, or 2 or 3 days ago, he came up with the policy directive that audit queries should not exceed 24 hours, which I think is a little bit... No, he said 24 hours. 30 days is what he gave for the resolution of all outstanding audit queries, which have been there for years. He gave 30 days for them to be resolved, but he says you must answer an audit query within 24 hours, which I think is a little bit difficult to... But whatever it is just a presidential directive, not backed by law. So is it not better for him to look at the audit bill that has been passed and sign it so that this becomes a law that will survive him? Because if you have another president tomorrow, nothing says that he must continue with the former president's directive. He can change it. But if you have a law, it becomes more difficult, and you now need to go back to the National Assembly to repeal it. And when you are repealing it, you now give reasons. And people like us may have to shout to say, no, don't repeal it, let it stay. So we want that audit bill signed into law, or if he wants a new audit bill, if he is not happy with that one, let them send a new one to the National Assembly. Now, on borrowing and indebtedness, which is one of the last issues that were considered at the tribunal, we reaffirm that it should be on concessional terms with low interest rates and a long amortization period with prior legislative approval and citizens' participation, restricted to funding the capital expenditure and human development, and must be preceded by a cost-benefit analysis. See, we don't want people to go and borrow simply to pay salaries. We don't want people to go and borrow for recurrent expenditure. And when you are borrowing, you must not have a source of funding and project mismatch. That's where cost-benefit analysis comes in. You cannot go and borrow at 25% interest rate from a commercial banks simply because you want to do a school or you want to build a road. It doesn't make sense. The benefits that will accrue from that road will not have been due by the time the banker is calling you to repay the money. So such monies may have to come from international development finance organizations like the World Bank, African Development Bank, that gives you opportunity to go over 20-25 years, gives you first 5 to 10 years amortization period, don't pay, charges you little or no interest, some service charge that doesn't exceed 2 to 3% per annum. So with that, you are much more relaxed rather than going to borrow at 25% interest per annum and then trying to use it to build a road build a hospital, build a water project. So ladies and gentlemen, these were some of the recommendations that came out from the tribunals in trying to ameliorate the challenges that we identified. But there are so much more in this booklet, which if you take your time and look at it, you'll be able to glean much more details about what informed the recommendations we've made. So thank you. This is a brief, and we will take your comments and questions. But my colleague, Mr. Joseph Amegawa from the Institute, from the Osiwa, who are supporting this program, should be able to tell us one or two things before we proceed.
I think Mr. Isaac continually changes my name. My surname is Amenao, not Amegawa.
Sorry.
Just to say that we're very delighted to have been able to support this initiative, which I think is the first in the history of the country. But beyond looking at the national level issues, I think there is a big opportunity for us to replicate this at the state level. We know clearly the challenges that our states are faced with, and some of these issues that have been raised at these tribunals also dovetail into the states. I, for one, will be interested in how communities face up to their state governments to engage on fiscal governance issues, most especially with regards to the area of borrowing funds to run projects and pay salaries. I think one other thing that will be of good for us all is to really take our time to read this brief and ensure that we also use it in accentuating our own understanding of the policy directions and governance issues with regards to managing our resources in Nigeria. Thank you so much.
So the floor is open for your comments and questions.